yes, I'm Trisha. I'm going to talk to you about playing and having fun because Matthias told me to. So that's why I'm here. I work for Gradle. Did you know, who knew that Gradle has 2 products? One person, because I told them last night. So Gradle has Gradle Build Tool, which you probably all know about, and Develocity, which is a developer productivity tool. Now, I'm not going to tell you about Gradle or Develocity, but if I don't mention it, they won't pay my expenses. So I should mention, have a look at Develocity. It's a developer productivity tool that supports Gradle, Maven, Bazel, and SPT. Right, I'm done. Great. So I'm Trisha. My remote doesn't work. Oh, I am a professional speaker. What am I doing? Oh, I've got a laser. I've got back. I do not have forward. Help! Am I going to have to say next slide? Because if that's true, I'm going to kill myself. I pressed the green one. I'm not new. It's not working. I'm telling you. I knew I should have done it off my laptop. I don't know why I listened to you. Reboot the system, it'd be fine. While it's rebooting, I'm a developer advocate for Gradle. I've previously worked at JetBrains, used to do a lot of stuff with IntelliJ IDEA. I like to mention that I'm an author, so that, oh great, thank you, so that you buy my book, because otherwise there's no point in me being here whatsoever. That's not true. I'm here because I like being here, and community and connections and all the stuff I spoke about yesterday. But the main reason I'm here is because I have opinions. And they asked me to come up on stage, so now you get to hear my opinions, and you have to like it. Or, you know, rate it badly in the ratings, but please don't do that. So you've just spent 2 days at a conference learning, hopefully, interesting things, or 3 days if you were actually at the workshop day on Monday. So now, hopefully, you're all like excited, and you've learned new stuff, and you want to do cool things. When I was preparing these slides, my eldest child was sick. So she's like, can I draw a slide for you, Mummy? So I said, I want you to draw these people. I want you to imagine you've been to a conference and you've learned something cool, and then you want to go away and do something with that cool thing. So she's like, oh, imagine I learned Canva. She wants to be a designer, so I'm very happy about that. She can be my designer. So that's why she was thinking about Canva. So this person in purple, this is you. Just so you know, and you got excited about AI and about programming games in IntelliJ IDEA and all these things. You're going to go home, and you're going to do those things when you get back to the day job. Because when you get back to the day job, you're very excited about what you're going to do. It's going to be very easy for you to put into place all the things you've been learning about over these last 2 days, right? Resounding silence. Good. Excellent. So what are you going to do with everything that you've learned when you go back to the day job, where the day job is kind of like you've got things to do, you've got stuff that you need to get on with, and how are you going to fit in all the stuff that you've learned in the day job? In my uneducated opinion, there are 2 types of people in this world. One type of person is, right, I've got loads of stuff to do, I've got loads of bugs to fix, I've got new features to do, I've got improvements to make and refactoring, and like I just don't have time for all the things I just learned about. There will be time to do that later, at some point. This is very much a me sort of thing. Or there's the other kind of person who goes, well, I don't really have time to do that kind of thing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it now, before I forget what I was doing, and I'm going to re-implement everything in the new language or framework I just learned about, not tell anyone, and just do it immediately, otherwise no one's going to let me do it ever again, which they shouldn't. So there's kind of 2 extremes. Probably most of us live somewhere in the middle. And there are disadvantages and advantages to both of these kind of viewpoints. The disadvantages of being someone like me is you don't really get to innovate, you don't really get to try new things. You feel like your career is not really growing, and you're a bit stuck in a rut. And in the early days of my career, probably the first 10 years of my career as a developer, this was kind of very much me, and I tended to move jobs in order to learn new stuff, because I felt like I didn't really have permission to do new things on the job. The advantage of being this kind of person is that you're focused on delivery, you're focused on delivering business value, whatever that means, and you're very reliable, and people like what you're doing. On the other hand, if you're the other kind of person, the disadvantage might be that you might choose new technologies without fully evaluating them, and you might implement stuff without getting buy-in from the rest of the team, and the business, whoever that is, might feel like you're not working on priority things. But the advantage of being this kind of person is that you get things done. You apply new techniques and new technologies, and you're an innovator, and you're helping to improve things over time, probably improving things. The issue really comes because, like, neither of these types of people really likes the other one. Because if you're over here, you're like, how comes this person gets to try out new stuff all the time when I don't really have time to do that kind of thing? And then this person over here is sort of saying, this person just never really tries anything new, and they're just like stuck in their ways, and they're not doing anything, and they should just do it. It's a kind of like the ask for permission versus ask for forgiveness kind of two mentalities. The thing we need to understand about this is that these two types of personalities, these two types of people, are fundamentally motivated by the same thing, which is there's a lot of pressure to deliver. And this manifests in two different ways. The first is, I'm just going to deliver that stuff. And the second is, it's impossible to get everything done, so let's try and innovate and do new things to try and get stuff done. And let's just do it now without asking anyone, because no one will ever give us permission to do it. So the pressure to deliver is the thing that underlies sort of both of these approaches to applying new stuff in the workplace. Oh, I should have worn my glasses. I can't see this. This is a quote from Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, which I do recommend reading because it's the lost art of accomplishment without burnout. I particularly like the without burnout bit. And he says, in the modern office context, knowledge workers tend to rely on stress as a default heuristic for moderation. What he's saying in this piece is he's talking about how modern knowledge workers, they are often autonomous or autonomous-ish. They're not working on an assembly line being told do this and plug this in and do that. When I worked at LMAX, for example, we were a self-motivated team just to select the things that we're going to work on based on priorities, and we're sort of autonomous in getting on with things as we should. The problem with certain levels of autonomy, especially without very clear ideas about what our productivity means or our objectives or the value that we're adding, is that we can't use anything external to figure out, am I doing too much or am I doing too little? What happens is we use stress to decide whether to say yes or no to things. So if we're not stressed enough, we just keep saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, I've got time for that. Yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, I'm going to do that. Up to the point where we get so stressed, we say, no, no, no. And we use stress as our way of figuring out whether we're going to take on more stuff or not. And what this means is that you are, by default, always too busy, because you're always taking on more stuff up to that point of being just stressed enough to make sure stuff gets done, but not so stressed that you're going to burn out, probably, depending. And the thing is that your management is probably kind of fine with this, because you're just going to work up to the point and take on more stuff up to the point where you can't do any more. But your management should not be happy about this. And the reason is because if you're stressed, you're not productive. This is from an article called The Culture of Busyness from HBR, which says, research indicates that when organizations overload employees, base their incentives primarily on the amount of time they work, and excessively monitor their activities, productivity and efficiency actually drop. So the more you try and get productivity out of your employees, the less productive they are. So they're miserable, unhappy, not learning anything, and not productive. So it's the worst of all worlds. This is my younger daughter, who was sick the week after my first daughter was sick. I didn't get a lot of time to work on these slides because I was sick the week later. Anyway, so we're unhappy and unproductive. And what's worse, we're too busy to make the changes that will make us less busy. We're existing at this point of stress. And this is also from Slow Productivity. Knowledge workers exist at that point of having too much to do, but it's just manageable enough to avoid reform. So we're busy, we're stressed, we're unproductive, but we're not so stressed that we go, wait a minute, let's do something to change this, because we're kind of coping just about managing. So if you want to make the most of what you've learned here, you will need to make some changes. You can't stay in this constant state of being like just stressed enough to kind of be on the edge of burnout, but not stressed enough to do anything about it, you have to make some changes. And the problem is that change is hard. Don't like change. There's an article that Kent Beck wrote about, I don't know if any of you have read this, he was talking about the desert and the forest. He says there's kind of two flavors of development teams, environments, processes. One is the desert, which is all about like sort of strict processes and tech specs and sign-offs and code reviews and that kind of thing. He calls that the desert. And there's a forest, which is more autonomous, self-organizing teams, which when that goes correctly is more productive for whatever we mean for productive. And he's talking about why is it so difficult to move from the desert to the forest. It's because change is hard. You have to effectively invest energy, and you'll start increasing waste, sort of pushing yourself up this hill. And there's going to come a time, probably before you reach the top of the hill, where you just slip back down into the old habits, the old ways, the comfortable way of doing stuff. The change is hard. Now, Kent Beck knows a thing or two about change. His whole original book was about embracing change. Change is a natural part of what we do in IT, and we need to embrace it and harness it and use it. So, how do we make changes? How do we embrace change? Let's start small, because we're already too busy, so let's not go crazy. Let's not try and rewrite the whole application in Rust. I know that Rust is so 2 years ago. I know. That's kind of the point. Like 2 years ago, everyone was like, Rust, we need to do Rust. And I was like, OK, whatever. And now, of course, this year, no one cares about Rust because everyone cares about AI. And that is kind of both not the point and exactly the point. Because trends and fashions change so fast that like, if you had rewritten your whole application in Rust 2 years ago, did anyone do that? Just checking. Now you'd be like, well, I don't care about Rust anymore because I should have used an AI to rewrite it for me. So let's not go big. Let's not rewrite our whole application, or let's not fire all of our engineers and replace them with AI, please. Let's start small. Let's start by creating a culture of continuous learning. So you've all been at this conference, and this is like a huge step for your organization, because lots of organizations don't let developers take time out to go to conferences, because it's expensive for money and time. But once you get back to work, you still want to sort of continue this culture of continuous learning. The first way that I like quite a lot is brown bags. So brown bags, in case you don't know, are like one lunchtime a week or whatever, where you sit down with your sandwich in your conference room, if you still work in the office, or in front of Zoom, if you don't, and someone will share something cool that they learned. Probably a good way to start brown bags, if you're not already doing them, is that you will host a brown bag and tell your colleagues what you learned at this conference, which is kind of cool. It has a number of benefits. Obviously, you're going to be telling your colleagues the cool stuff that you learned and get them thinking about, well, maybe we can use this. Maybe there's some benefits for these ways of working. The other advantage is that you get to think about what you learnt. What were your 3 top tips? What were the things you found most fun? What do you think is the thing that's missing in your work that you want to take away from this conference? So sharing your knowledge is a really good way to sort of solidify that knowledge and kind of move it on. There's things like hack days and hackathons. When I worked at MongoDB, we used to do, I think it was 48-hour hackathons about once every quarter. I don't know, it was a long time ago, when I was young and naive. And so you take like 2 days and you work on something. It could be it could be a demo project which uses MongoDB, or it could be an internal admin tool that you're going to need, or it could be whatever. Just you can work on something, just something which kind of like gets your creative juices flowing and maybe solves a problem for the business, or maybe just allows you to investigate new technologies. There's 20% time. Who's heard of 20% time? OK, that's kind of what I said. That's about 5% of you. About 15 years ago, it was very, very trendy to have 20% time, because it was the thing that Google did, and Google did everything right. So everyone followed what Google. No one's laughing at that, because they probably don't think that's funny. But you know, so about 15 years ago, a lot of organizations were putting aside 1 day a week for their engineers to work on their own learning and development, or work on their own projects. It might, probably not pet projects, it might be something that might help the business, but it's not key for the requirements they're working on. Or it might be, we used to do this at JetBrains as well, so 20% time might not be a pet project, it might be just they loan you to a different team. So if you're on the IntelliJ team, you might spend 1 day a week working with the Team City team, so you learn a bit more about parallelization of builds, or whatever it is. So some organizations have been doing this for some time, where you spend 1 day a week on something different, and it allows you to learn stuff, and also cross-pollinate that learning between the different projects or whatever. As you can kind of see, these things are kind of in ascending order of effort. So like 1 hour a week versus 1 day a week versus something like an experimentation sprint. An experimentation sprint is probably a little bit further down the process of we've investigated something and we think we want to do something with this in our organization. We're going to set aside a week, 2 weeks for the whole development team to kind of swarm on implementing a new project or a new service or something, trying out this new technology. And that usually should be a prototype, which you throw away. Who's working in somewhere where their prototypes are still in production? Oh, like all of you, OK. 10 years later? Yes, OK. I mean, there's nothing wrong, really, with running a prototype in production if it works, except that they often don't work, right? Anyway, you should throw prototypes away and redo them properly. The whole point about these different steps for introducing this continuous learning culture is to try and bring these two sides of people together, to try and get them a bit closer to the middle and give them both kind of what they need. So, for example, the folks on this side are sort of saying, oh, well, I have a bit of time for that. I can spend an hour a week researching this thing, or half a day a week on, if I'm allowed to spend it on that project, then I have permission to do something innovative. And then the people on this side are going, oh, great, now I actually have permission to do this stuff, and I don't have to do it secretly, and I can kind of show people the cool stuff that I'm interested in and I'm learning. So it's a good way to sort of bring those two sides together. Now, with any luck, at this conference, you've been learning lots of cool and interesting things. And maybe you've also learned stuff by reading social media or talking to your friends or whatever. So there's probably a lot of things that you want to try out and experiment. And if you're talking about having a couple of hours a week, it's not really enough to invest a lot of time and energy into something. So you need to choose where you're going to spend your energy when you're learning things or experimenting with new things. There's going to be things which kind of like want you to pick them because they help you with the business excuse me, the business requirements or solve a particular business problem. There's also going to be things which look great in terms of like helping you with your team efficiencies, helping you to work better, or maybe just like have a little bit more fun with your team. By the way, if you are interested in a product which is good for team efficiency, do check out Develocity. Right, I'm done. It's OK, I'm done. I promise. There's going to be other things where people are kind of like screaming at you, AI is cool, you should definitely try AI. You're like, OK, I'm going to try AI because everyone told me we should try AI. I'm like, all right. So there's going to be these different types of pressure. Probably the last kind of thing, if you're anything like me, of the external, the influence to try something new is, well, I kind of thought this was kind of cool, and maybe I might want to work on it. And it doesn't have business value, and it doesn't help the team, and it's not something that anyone else seems to care about, but it is something that I think is kind of cool. And what you do need to do is you do need to prioritize your own thoughts and feelings on this, not just get driven by external pressures or whatever. Because ultimately, you are an investment, and you are going to have to stick with you for the rest of your life. Probably. I can't see how that would go any other way. Whereas you're not necessarily going to be working for your company for the rest of your life. I mean, I don't know if they know that, but you're not going to be there forever. You're not necessarily going to be in that team forever. But you are going to stick with your own career for the rest of your life. So anything you invest your energy in needs to be something, ideally, that you enjoy, that you're going to get something out of, that maybe might pave the way for whatever you want to do in the future. You have to consider where you're going with this and not just think about, well, everyone said I should do this thing, so I'll just do this thing. Because then, even your learning and experimentation and fun is still something someone else told you need to do instead of something that you want to do. So let's talk about the second law of thermodynamics, because that's relevant. Entropy always increases with time. Now, what we're talking about is we're talking about energy and where you invest your energy and spending your energy in something. Entropy is a gradual decline into disorder. Like, you know what entropy is. Entropy is the state of your kitchen at the end of the week. Entropy is your children's bedrooms after 37 seconds. Entropy is what happens when you don't do anything. Like, stuff just gets worse. You have to put energy into a system in order to keep it in some vague order. So you need to be considering this energy that you have for learning and experimentation and so forth. Consider, like, where you're going to put that. But you do need to be improving something. You need to invest your energy in something. If you aren't improving something, things are going to get worse. That's what entropy says. So whatever everyone else is telling you need to be working on, or whatever you think you should be working on and spending your energy on, just pick something. Pick an area to investigate, to learn, to move, to whatever. Pick something. Because if you're making small changes, you're combating entropy ever so slightly. Otherwise, everything's just going to get worse. Having said that, things probably will get worse before they get better. If you're going to try and make changes and introduce this culture of continuous learning, and if you're going to try and do things in a different way, things will often get worse before they get better. Another picture I stole from Kent Beck. I should have asked him before I stole all these things. So he has another blog post, and he's talking about, like, if you're here, he's talking about code and making code improvements, but it's relevant for this. So you start here. Good, you can see this. And you want to be over here. Yeah, I did just want to put a twirly star in my slides because it's cool. Then obviously, it's going to be easy. All you have to do is just go from there to there. Sorry, I did the other way. From there to there. Easy. How often has development been easy? Often what happens is you start to go down first, because sometimes you need to undo some of the stuff that happened first before you can make any improvements. And this is what Kent Beck calls the trough of despair. Who's been in the trough of despair? Yeah, right, all of you, yes. I live there, actually. My house is down there at the bottom. I'm in the trough of despair. And the problem with the trough of despair is that you're going to have to go down right to the bottom of the trough of despair before you can make your way up to the trough of despair. I mention this because it's worth knowing that things aren't always going to be rosy, and you're trying to make changes to make things better, but you're not necessarily going to see immediate improvements. If you find yourself in the trough of despair, you might want to take a step back and try and remember why you're doing this. What is the point of making these changes? What is the point in learning something new? What is the point in investigating something which is wildly off the beaten track? Of course, what you're doing is to create a more efficient team with faster delivery and higher productivity. Right, yes, that's definitely what we're doing. That's what we're telling the boss. That's what we're doing, improving efficiency for the team, because productivity is good. But really, what we're doing it for is because learning and trying new things is fun. It's fun to do this. Some of us might have forgotten that it was fun as programmers, but it is fun to write code, and it is fun to solve problems, and it is fun to learn new things. It might be that some people might not agree with this, and work should not be fun. But Fred Brooks said at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, he says in the Mythical Man Month, he talks about the joys of the craft, the joys of being a developer. He says, 1, the sheer joy of making things. 2, the pleasure of making things that are useful to other people. I keep forgetting about that useful to other people thing. 3, the fascination of fashioning complex puzzle-like objects and watching them work. I do like it when it works. 4, the joy of always learning. If you don't love learning, you are stuck as a developer, because you're going to have to be learning, constantly learning forever. Forget the fact that AI is going to be a huge problem for our jobs in the future. Just like new frameworks, new languages, new versions of Java, new paradigms, new ways of working, new operating systems, new colleagues. Like, you have to always be learning, otherwise you're just not going to survive in this industry. And step 5, the delight of working in such a tractable medium. Except that we don't really use it as a tractable medium, we just keep everything, even things like prototypes that we should throw away and start again. Now, how am I supposed to sell joy to my boss? Because really, all they really care about is productivity. I mean, I'm sure your bosses are lovely. I'm sure they're very nice people. But they report to someone else, and they have to justify everything to someone else. So the way that you justify it is that fun is actually productive. Thousands of years ago, Aristotle says, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. I stole this from Holly Cummins. She talks about this in one of her talks. But it's completely true. If we enjoy what we're doing, we generally do a good job of it. If we're having fun, we don't just go, never mind, it's fine, it'll be all right. We kind of go take pleasure in it and treat it like an artisanal project or whatever. So if we're having fun, we're usually doing a good job. And there's loads and loads of research which shows that fun, joy, happiness is productive. Happier employees are more productive. Employees who take time to have fun are more productive. If you're interested in any of this research, I will have a link at the end of the session, and you can go to a page which has got all of these things in here. So you can wave them at your boss and say, see, I should be happy. The point is that traditionally, particularly from a sort of Victorian Industrial Revolution factory kind of point of view, we were often thinking that happiness, fun, and joy are like the opposite of productivity, and never the twain shall meet. When in actual fact, in knowledge work specifically, happiness, fun, and joy are a really important part of what makes us productive. Without those things, we're significantly less productive. So we should be focusing on increasing our happiness, fun, and joy, and not focusing on increasing the productivity, which tends to squash the happiness and joy. Another point which is really important to know is that play gives us energy. We've been talking about putting energy into the system. Where do we get our energy from? Sometimes we get it from play. And this is something that was quoted, it was from Daniel Pink's book, When, which I highly recommend as well. Actually, all these books I mentioned, I highly recommend. And in this section, it says, breaks and recess are not deviations from learning. They are part of learning. Years of research show kids who have recess work harder, fidget less, focus more intently, earn better grades, develop better social skills, show greater empathy, and cause fewer disruptions. They even eat healthier food. In short, if you want kids to flourish, let them leave the classroom. Of course, this is not just about kids. This is about us. Screw the kids. Developers need breaks. Developers perform better with breaks. It's important for us to take the time to play, to get energy from somewhere else, to take breaks. Otherwise, we just don't have anything left. But do try and play safely. I've kind of put this in passing a few times. Like I say, don't just re-implement the whole application in Rust and, yeah, I was playing, and play is really productive. I want us to think about how and where we can safely play with things. So some suggestions kind of hinted at with some of the other things we were talking about. Things like pet projects, whether they're pet projects for you or kind of at work. Things like spikes or prototypes, like new things that we can kind of work with and see if it's going to work or not. When I first created this specific slide about 10 years ago, I was like, this before I worked at Gradle, I was like, yeah, you can kind of play with the build tool and the CD system. And that's kind of a safe place to play. I might want to caveat that slightly now. I spent a lot more time looking at build systems and CD pipelines and say, one of the quotes that came from Mike Nygaard's Release It book is, the systems you use to get your code into production are your production code, because your code has to go through there. So maybe don't just play around with the build system, but it's not the same as messing around with code that's user-facing. It might be a slightly safer place to experiment with new tools or new languages. Another place, automated tests. You all have automated tests, right? Right. All right. You're Java folks, you've got automated tests. I go to other conferences where people are like, automated what's? Like, okay. So automated tests are another good place to kind of experiment with stuff. I was at a conference like this many years ago. Someone talked about Spock, and I was like, oh, Spock looks amazing. So I went away and rewrote some of our tests in Spock, which is very cool, and I still really like Spock, but there are some downsides to the way that it interacts with various things. So yeah, I probably shouldn't have rewritten all our tests in Spock, but it was fun. I had fun. I was productive. Internal tools, so you can play with new technologies on internal admin tools maybe. It's not quite as dangerous as perhaps impacting your paying end users. There's a downside to messing with internal tools, though, is that your internal users, if they sit in the same office as you, if you break something, they can come up and stand over your desk until you fix it. You're like, sorry, okay, I'll stop rewriting that in a different language and get your tool back to where it was before. If you've got a new project, a new service, a new process, that might be somewhere to try out a new technology somewhat more safely than trying to rewrite something. OK, so we want safe places to play and to experiment. We need time to think. We're knowledge workers, after all. We're not horses carrying stuff from A to B. We need to be able to think. We need to be able to be creative. We need to be able to think of new ideas and solve problems. That's what we do. Actually, it turns out that we also really need time to not think. How many of you have solved a problem in the shower? Like everyone. Or running, or in the gym, or you wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, I know what's wrong with that code. And the reason is because there's a sort of different mode of your brain working, the default mode network, which is the kind of like, it's a different state that it's in when you're not doing anything. And that means your brain is working slightly differently. And it's really important to engage the default mode network, because sometimes we find ourselves solving problems more easily than when we're actually trying to actively solve the problems. So we need to take time to do nothing. I like to take showers. I like to run when I can. I'm not this morning because it was cold and I didn't have a sweater. But I like to run, or I also like to knit. So I do a bunch of knitting because then I tie up my hands so I'm not able to distract myself by talking on Slack or whatever. So it kind of forces me to step back from the keyboard and just think in a slightly different way. So we need to take time to not do things. I want to wrap up this section with another quote. There's absolutely nothing you can do to motivate others. People are already intrinsically motivated, engaged, and interested. So these organizations that try and make you more productive by giving you motivations are kind of killing your productivity. But if you want to be more motivated and happier, and if you're kind of interested in following up some of these ideas that you've learned here, then you can kind of engage your inner motivation. You know, I like learning. I like playing with stuff. I like experimenting. I don't have to rely on someone else measuring my productivity in that space as an excuse to play with something new and experiment with something. So now you've done all of that, and you're making changes, and you're playing with new things, and you're learning. Now you can reap the benefits of everything that you've done. So we've talked about how happiness, fun, and joy are all tied into productivity. And I want us to remember this. And I want us to try and remember that you don't increase productivity to increase happiness. You increase happiness to increase productivity. So let's not focus on the productivity. Let's focus on the cool stuff that we want to do. Camille Fournier says in The Manager's Path, we engineers automate so that we can focus on the fun stuff. And the fun stuff is the work that uses most of your brain. So one of the, I've heard time and time again about, I want to hire a lazy engineer, because lazy engineers will automate all the boring stuff because they don't want to keep doing that. They kind of want to make the space for the rest of their job. I don't really like the term lazy engineer, but I do love this idea that if we're doing lots of boring stuff, we should be automating that so that we can make more space for the other things that we want to do. Sometimes we're not very motivated to do this because sometimes our organizations are looking at our productivity in terms of, well, if you're pressing the keyboard a lot, you must be really productive. So it's much easier to look busy by doing stupid manual processes. But if you can automate some of those stupid manual processes, you'll have time for thinking. You'll have time for learning. You'll have time for having a bit more fun. Engineers do have a somewhat weird sense of fun. I mean, I've talked about you can have fun by playing with new technologies, which no one in this room seems to be disagreeing with, so that's a good thing. Again, from Kent Beck's book, he says, you might make a list of messes to tidy later. I call this my fun list because I have an odd notion of fun. I love this idea of a fun list of, because I really like refactoring stuff. I like cleaning up code. That's one of my things. I'm not really a give me a greenfield project and start something new person. I'm a give me a big fat mess and I'll just tidy it because it's fun. So I love this idea of having a fun list of like messy, dirty code to kind of go through when I've got a moment. I'm going to have fun with this. Your fun list might look different. Your fun list might be, I saw this really cool session at JFocus and I want to find out a bit more about that. Or I didn't see this cool session. I must make time to watch it on the YouTube channel or wherever the videos are going to be later on. And remember as well that one of the things about fun for our engineers is the joy of always learning. So instead of being like, oh, God, now I have to learn something new, we should be a bit more like, great, now I've got an opportunity to learn something new. Another key point about learning things is that learning stuff makes you better at learning stuff. Now, obviously, learning stuff helps you to learn that stuff, but the more that you learn, the better you get at learning. If you ask any of the more senior engineers in this room, anyone with like more than 10 years experience, like how worried they are about learning new stuff, whether it's AI or whatever, they're probably a lot less worried about learning something new than the more junior engineers. And it's not really because they know more, it's because they've had much more practice at learning things. So we should be going away and learning new stuff, not because we need to learn that thing necessarily, although that's kind of cool too. We're practicing this skill of learning things. And as an engineer, we're going to need to keep learning things, otherwise we're just, going to die off and be irrelevant, be replaced by machines. Just to cheer things up. Adapting to an ever-accelerating sequence of new technologies also trains the mind. I can't see without my glasses. Also trains the mind to explore and master complex systems. This is from an excellent book called Everything Bad is Good for You, and it's about how watching telly makes you smarter. So you should definitely read that book. But the point about this particular piece was about how our brain elasticity, our ability to learn, just gets better the more that we learn. So learning stuff just to practice the skill of learning things is valuable in its own right, even if you don't use that thing that you learned. But paying the cost of learning speeds you up in the long run. So if you are learning something and it's useful, that can help speed you up in the long run. Kathy Sierra says in the book Badass, which everyone should read because it's amazing, learning drains cognitive resources. But after you've learned it, using the now automatic knowledge and skill is fast and effortless. Knowledge in the head trades slower learning time now for faster using time later. And I always use this as an excuse to learn the keyboard shortcuts for IntelliJ IDEA, because, by the way, buy my IntelliJ IDEA book. But if you learn the keyboard shortcuts for IntelliJ IDEA, you don't have to think about that anymore. You don't have to find it on the menu or figure out if there's a feature to do that. Your fingers just do that, so your brain is free to work on the more interesting stuff. So you do want to invest time in learning things which makes your job a little bit easier. And learning is not just for developers. So I've already been a little bit mean about all your managers and how they're never going to give you time to do stuff. Your managers should be learning stuff too. Or if you are a manager, you should be learning stuff too. Again, from Camille's book, one major weak spot for managers is losing touch with the tools and processes for actually developing, testing, deploying, and monitoring code. It's arguably more important for management to spend some time learning things because they have greater influence on the direction of the organization. So the more senior you are, probably the more important it is to invest some time in learning and experimenting and playing. So make time to play with new things when you go back to work. Because the happiness, fun, and joy all ends up adding to your overall productivity. In fact, this is kind of so well known now, so well known in space like in areas where I work, which is about developer productivity. There's a framework for creating frameworks for measuring developer productivity called SPACE. And kind of number one in the kind of area to measure to figure out if your developers are productive is the satisfaction and well-being of your developers. I mean, it's really number one because it begins with S and it makes a nice acronym. But from my point of view, it's the most important measurement of your productivity. So your satisfaction and well-being is a very important part of the overall company's performance and productivity, which means that you're totally justified to go and have fun, learn, experiment, and play. So just to wrap all of this up, coming in more or less on time, I'm amazed. What if you could capitalize on the training investment of this conference, it's management speak for your managers, spend time having fun at work, and add business value? So let's play. Thank you very much.